Hey guys, welcome back to the YouTube channel Programming Knowledge. In today's Microsoft Excel tutorials video, we would be continuing with our discussion on the slicers in Microsoft Excel. So as we all know that from our previous video, slicers are used to apply filters over the data in the pivot tables. So here we have our pivot table which we created in the past table. So I have applied this pencil filter using this item slicer. Now in this video what we are going to see is that how one slicer could be connected with many pivot tables. Okay, so in our previous video we saw that with one table more than one slicers could be connected. Like with this table we have the year slicer as well as the item slicer. So now we are going to see that how one slicer could be connected with more than one pivot tables. Okay, so there is a simple trick behind this fact which is pretty easy to understand. So let's first see that how can we create a pivot table. So in order to create a pivot table, what you got to do is just go to your data source, insert, and then go to pivot table. Then whole of this data source will be created. All you got to do is select a location on your existing worksheet, which could be anything like this, and then click on OK, and your sheet would be created, or your pivot table would be created with the pivot table fields. You got to select the rows or the data that you want to bring in. Like I want to bring in the names in the columns format. I want to bring in the date with the grouping of the years. So I'm just going to remove this quarters and order date of this years, and the units cost I want to bring in the values, and then I'm just going to close it. So this is my other pivot table where it is that how much purchasing has been done in which year by the person. Okay, so it is in a name wise fashion. Like if you want to know the value for Andrews, he purchased a total of $5.27 in both the years 2018 and 19. So this is the kind of the pivot table I've got. Now out of this, this year's slicer could be applied to this table. So if I want to apply this slicer, then how can I apply it? One interesting thing is you could go to options and go to report connections, and there must be this pivot table where if you just check on it, then the connection for the slicer would be maintained with this pivot table. But none of this thing exists over here. So what can we do now? So the simple thing is that it is actually not the way of connecting the slicer with the pivot table. Actually, you do not need to create a new pivot table. What you got to do is just go to just select this active cell from the pivot table, go to analyze tab, select entire pivot table and delete it. To make a pivot table connected with more than one slicer, you first got to go to that original pivot table with which the slicer is connected. Now I'm talking about year slicer, so just delete this item slicer by enabling multi-select. Okay, so I'm just going to delete this item slicer. Then this year slicer is present, so this is the only slicer that I'm concerned with. Go to this table, make sure your active cell is inside the table, press Ctrl A, or you can go to the analyze tab and select the entire pivot table, press Ctrl C to copy it, and at any other location just paste it like this. Okay, so now what we have done is we have got a copy of this table. Now if we just apply any kind of filtering through the slicers, then it is applicable on both of these tables. Now what you got to do is, if you don't want the exact copy of the table and you want to just modify it as per your choice, then how can you do it? You got to select this cell, go to the analyze tab and go to fields list. Now from here you can modify the pivot table very easily. Like instead of the columns, what I want is the names column, and instead of cost of items I want units cost. So this was my table and now it's been created. Now you can close the fields list. Similarly, you can, instead of using this criteria, you can use any of the criteria of your choice. It's totally up to you. That means you can easily create a pivot table. Now if you want to see that whether this slicer is working with this pivot table or not, how can you do that? Simply click on 2018. You can see that 2018 for this table is changed and 2018 for this table has been changed as well. So this is a simple method of creating or associating one slicer with more than one tables. Now, if you just click on this slicer and we try to view its properties, then just go to this options tab and here is this report connections. Then you can see that actually pivot table 2, which is this one, and this is pivot table 3, which is actually this table, are both created or associated with this slicer. Now what happens is, if you try and just remove one kind of a connection, if you just want to remove this pivot table 2 and you click on OK, then what happens is this slicer is now only connected with pivot table 3. So if you just apply any kind of filters, you can see it is only associated itself with pivot table 3, and now there is no connection with pivot table 2. The reason being, there is report connections property of this slicer. If you just turn it on for both the tables, then it would be associated with both the tables. And similarly, if you want to turn it off for table 3, pivot table 3, then it would be turned off as well. So that is about how you can connect your slicer with more than one pivot table, and there was this simple trick associated. Now instead of the slicer, if you want this table to be associated with some other kind of filtering criteria, then what can you do is insert a timeline. Now the timeline, as the name suggests, is only associated with the data that involves some time. Like if you have years, months or weeks or quarters or any kind of that data, time data, then only you can insert a timeline. So that is a condition for inserting the timeline. But whenever you have this kind of data, it is advisable to use a timeline instead of a slicer. Of course you can use a slicer, but a timeline is more effective in that case. So let us see that how can we do that. It's simple. You got to select the cell inside the pivot table to which you want to apply the timeline, but make sure that some kind of numerical data or a time data is present. Like in this case, years are present and the months are present, which are time data. Then go to this analyze tab. Here in the filter groups itself, you will find this insert timeline option. Now you can see that the only option it gives us is of months, because that is our time data. Okay, you can click on month and you can click on OK. When you do that, you can see that a timeline has been created. Now what data it has is from January 2018, you can say that's 2018 January, up till it has it till 2019's December. Now I want to just filter the records to show the data of 2018 January till 2019 July. And as soon as I do that, you can see that only the selected records have been visible in this pivot table. Now this was about the months, but we have years as well. So if you just click on this drop down, you will find this years option as well. You can click on years. I don't want this data for 2018. I only want it for 2019. So you can see that only the data for the year 2019 is now visible. Similarly, instead of the years, you can also go with quarters, like quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. I want the data of quarter 3 of the year 2019. Okay, so I have filtered it using the quarters. So this was this July and September data that is visible. Similarly, if you want the data of quarter 1 for the year 2018, then you can see that it is done as well. Okay, so this is filtering through quarters. Similarly, if you want data on a days wise fashion, then there are these days, but since we have already applied the quarter filter, so it's showing the data of quarter 1 to quarter 2 of 2018. But you can see that these are all these other things also available. I mean, up till this, suppose you want to show only a single day's data, like I checked on 31st December 2019, then you can see that no data is shown because there is no such data present. Now if I just go to my source data, it's 27 April 2019. That is the date present in our records. So if we just go to 27 April 2019 and I just clicked on that date, so the record for that date over here is now visible. So that is the advantage of using a timeline. You can apply filters using a single date. You can apply filters using the quarters. You can apply filters using months. You can apply filters using years. So that is the advantage of using a timeline over a slicer, especially for the date or the time data. Now if you want to customize this timeline, what you can do is just click on it, go to options tab, and here are all these customizing options that you can select any one of them as per your wish. Then you can go to report connections to see that with how many tables it is associated. And since what happened was our table pivot table 3 was just a copy of pivot table 2, that is why in this insert timeline we have an option of pivot table 2 as well. If you just check on it and click on OK, then you can see that this slicer is also connected with pivot table 2. So that is the advantage of using or copying the pivot tables. All the slicers or all the timelines that you apply on a table have an option of connecting with the all the copies of the table that are already existing. So that is all in today's video about the slicer and the timeline. Thanks for watching.